So in this question, it's asking us about a triangle. And if I think about what the word altitude means, if I drew myself a triangle like this, the altitude goes from the vertex of the triangle straight down to the opposite side, and it creates a right angle. So this will hit so that these two lines, the base and the altitude, are perpendicular to each other. So what I know is that this is my base, and the altitude is determined from the base. So this altitude here is 5 less than the base, and I can write that as x minus 5. So in this case, our value of x is the base measurement. I'm going to keep that in mind because ultimately my goal is to determine the base and the altitude. So they told us the area of the triangle is 42 square units. I know that the area of a triangle is 1/2 base times height. So I'm going to start filling in the pieces of the puzzle that I know and substituting those values into my equation. So I know the area is 42. I know the base is x, and I know the height is x minus 5. Well, from here, we don't really have any tools in our toolbox to help us solve this as is, but if this was multiplied through and I actually did this multiplication, I would have x squared at some point, and I do know how to solve with a quadratic. So we're going to go ahead and start multiplying through. So x times x would make x squared. X times negative 5 would make negative 5x. And I'm going to leave this fraction out here because Lord knows nobody likes to work with fractions. So my next step is actually going to be to get rid of this fraction because that's not going to help us in any way, shape, or form when we try to solve this quadratic. So in order to do that, I'm going to multiply this side of my equation by 2, but I also need to multiply that side of my equation by 2, which gives me 84 is equal to, this 1/2 multiplied by 2 is going to cancel out to create 1. So all that's going to be left is x squared minus 5x. I can't factor and solve this unless all of my terms are together on the same side of the equation, and this is equal to 0. So in order to do that, I need to subtract 84. So I'm going to have x squared minus 5x minus 84. And from here, I can factor and get my x values and determine which one would be valid for the base. So I'm going to start my box. In this corner, I have x squared. In this corner, I have negative 84. The coefficient here is 1, so I don't need to worry about multiplying, but I do need to worry about how to break down 84 and combine to make negative 5. And this is where I can start testing some values that would work. 2 and 28 are too big, they're too far apart, that won't create 5. 4 times 21 are also factors of 84, but again, they will not combine together to make negative 5. 6 and 14 are also factors of 84, but those won't combine to make negative 5. But 12 and 7 will. Okay, so we have determined that to multiply to make negative 84, I can use negative 12 and positive 7. Those two values add together to make negative 5. So those are the other two sides of the box that we're missing. Factoring from the inside out, I need to look for the greatest common factor. Along this row will be x. Along this row will be negative 12, because I can divide negative 12 out of both of those. Going up this column, I will have an x, and going up this column, I will have a 7. So here, my factors are x plus 7 and x minus 12. That's going to be equal to 0 because this is the equivalent of that expression. So I'm going to figure out what my two solutions would be. So for x plus 7 equals 0, x would be equal to negative 7. Since x represents the base of the triangle, this answer doesn't actually make sense. So that will not work. So let's try x minus 12 equals 0. This would give me a solution of x equals 12. It's a positive value for the base of the triangle. That will work. So for the base of the triangle, it is 12 inches because they gave us units. And the altitude is 12 minus 5 because the altitude is 5 less than the base. So this will be 7 inches. And that would be my solution for that question. The next question that we're going to do is question number 7. The product of two positive consecutive even integers is 120. And our goal is to find these integers. So there's a couple things that we need to talk about. I need to know what it means for integers to be consecutive and what consecutive integers means. So if my first number got labeled as x, the next even number would be 2 units away from where I started. If you think about the number 2, the next even integer would be 4. Those are 2 units apart. So my second number I could represent as x plus 2. So if x was 2, this would be 4. If x was 8, this would be 10. Product tells me I need to multiply these two things together. So x times x plus 2 gives me 120. Just like we talked about in the last question, I cannot solve a quadratic unless it is equal to 0. So I need to multiply this through, just like we did on the last problem. So this will be x squared plus 2x equals 120. And I can't solve unless they are equal to 0. So I need to subtract 120. So I will have x squared plus 2x minus 120 equals 0. From here, I can look at my factors of 120 that are negative, that combine together in the end to add to 2. So breaking down 120, I have 12 and 10. Since I want this to be positive 2, I'm going to make the 10 negative. We're going to go to our box from here. So I have x squared and negative 120. I have 12x and negative 10x. To get from the inside out, I'm going to look for the greatest common factor. So if I look at my columns, this one has a common factor of x. This one has a greatest common factor of negative 10. Looking at our rows, we have greatest common factors of x and 12. So I can rewrite this as x plus 12 times x minus 10, and that has to be equal to 0. So one of these two are my options. Well, if x plus 12 was 0, that would mean that x was negative 12, but they told me they want them to be positive, so that one will not work. X minus 10 being equal to 0 would give me a solution of x equals 10. So if my first number was 10, x being 10, then my second number would be 12. So those are my positive consecutive even integers that have a product of 120. The next question that we're going to look at is question number 9. It tells us that a model rocket is launched off the roof of a building. It gave us the equation for its flight path which is the height of the rocket based off of a certain number of seconds after it got launched. And our job is to determine when the rocket will hit the ground. If it's hitting the ground, the height of the rocket above the ground will be 0. So my goal is to determine what values of t make this equation equal to 0. T plus 35. So this is already nice and set up for us where we're solving to have this be equal to 0, and it already is equal to 0. So from here, I'm going to look at all of my coefficients. These all have a common factor of 5. If you remember what we talked about in class, we really don't like when the value of x squared or t squared in this case is negative. So I'm going to factor out a -5 from each of these terms because I do not want my first leading coefficient of that x squared term to be negative. That really does not sit well with me. So if I factor out a -5 here, -5 would need to be multiplied by t squared to get back to -5t squared. Here, -5 would need to multiply with -6 to give me positive 30. But I also need to multiply by a t to get back to that same term. And then here, -5 would need to multiply with -7 to get back to positive 35. So -5 is what I factored out of each term, so that's going to go outside of my parentheses. And then these other portions are going to be what was left over. And that piece inside of the parentheses is what we are now going to factor. So, going to the box, I have t squared and -7. And my goal is to break down -7, since this coefficient is 1, to somehow create -6. And the only way to make that happen is -7 and positive 1. I'll have -7t and 1t. And now we're looking for our greatest common factors again. So these two corners will be t, this will be -7, and this, they have nothing in common, so that will be 1. So I have t minus 7 times t plus 1, and that has to be equal to 0 because these two things are equivalent. I need to make sure I bring back the -5, but when I'm solving for 0, that piece of the puzzle, since there's no t, doesn't affect what happens with these two. If one of these two factors turns out to be 0, that -5 doesn't change anything. So I have t minus 7 being equal to 0, which means that t would be 7. And here we have t plus 1 being equal to 0, which means that t would be -1. Well, we cannot go backwards in time, so time being -1 seconds doesn't make sense. So for our final answer, we have 7 seconds that it would take this rocket to hit the ground. So our last question that we're going to do together is question number 12. This question is telling us that we have a planning committee at a high school and they're asking for some help with income that they could receive based on different ticket prices. They gave us an equation here where I is income and P is the price of the ticket. So we're going to look at what they could charge for a ticket and end up breaking even. If I'm breaking even, that means my income amount is nothing because the money that we've taken in and the money that we've had to spend will make each other cancel out to 0. Everything that we take in is everything that we end up having to spend. So I have to take my income equation and set it equal to 0 because I'm not making income, I'm just breaking even. Which looks like all of the factoring questions that we've done that were special cases. So both of these can be divided by P, which here would leave me with P. If I divide by P here, I won't have any P's left on this side. I'm only going to have to deal with the coefficients. The reason I saved the coefficients for second this time is not only do I have a larger number, so in this case I would be nice and probably let you have a calculator, but this is also negative. And like I said in the last problem, I don't want to factor if I've got some negative stuff going on here. So I'm just going to get rid of that negative 75 and make my life easier in the long run. So if I divide 600 by negative 75, another way you could think about it, I have $6 and I got to break it up into chunks of 3/4. And that would end up being 8. So these are the pieces that I can factor out fully from each term. So I'm going to have negative 75p being multiplied with p minus 8. And this has to be a negative because negative 75 times negative 8 gives me positive 600. From here, these are as factored as I can make it. I can't go any more than just having p. So I'm going to set both of these things equal to 0. This one tells me that I'm charging nothing for a ticket. And we know that that would not make sense because if we don't charge any money, we can't pay our bills. Here, this tells me that p is equal to 8. So the ticket price that will let us break even is $8.